بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This is the second installment in the series of presentations on why Islam is true. In this presentation, I will show that God exists. Now, God exists is a claim. Remember that my approach in this series of short presentations is to evaluate the truth of such claims based on an examination of the evidence for them as well as the evidence against them. Let's start with the evidence that supports this claim. Before I try to find this evidence on my own, I'd like you to step back with me for a moment and recall that the reason why we are evaluating the truth of this claim, the claim that God exists, in other words, is because it is part of our evaluation of a larger claim that is the title of this series of presentations, namely the claim that Islam is true. Remember from the previous presentation that when I make the claim Islam is true, I have a clearly defined meaning of the term Islam in mind. What I mean by Islam is the claim that God created the universe, put us in it for a great purpose, and sent us messengers to tell us our purpose so that we might gain eternal happiness in our life after death. This claim rests on the subclaim that God created the universe. This subclaim, in turn, rests on a further subclaim that God exists. As I begin this presentation with the goal of showing you that God exists, I want you to bring to mind that this claim, God exists, is a subclaim of a larger claim, namely the claim that God created the universe, put us in it for a great purpose, and sent us messengers to tell us our purpose so that we might gain eternal happiness in our life after death. Now, if God created the universe, put us in it for a great purpose, and sent us messengers to tell us our purpose so that we might gain eternal happiness in our life after death, then surely He must have shown us that He exists. In other words, surely He must have given us some signs, arguments, indications of His existence so that the purpose for His creating us might be realized. In fact, He has. Therefore, I don't need myself to discover the evidence that supports the truth of the claim that God exists. All I need to do is evaluate the evidence that He Himself would be presenting us with if, in fact, it was the case that Islam is true. For that, I need to turn to the Qur'an. Here is an important verse to which we will be returning again and again throughout this series of presentations. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Verily, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, the succession of night and day, the ships that sail the sea with profit for mankind, the rain which God sends down from the sky and then gives life therewith to the earth after its death, the animals of all kinds that He scatters through the earth, the change of the winds and the clouds that they swirl between the sky and the earth. In all of these are surely great and numerous signs for those who reflect." This is the first of dozens of other verses in the Qur'an that point to the phenomena of the universe as evidence for God's existence. Here are 20 other sets of verses that I encourage you to look up on your own. If you follow the arguments of this series of presentations, you will see that these 20 sets of verses are all making the same argument that this verse that we are looking at now is making. And you will also see that there are many, many other verses in the Qur'an that do the same. The fact that the universe is evidence for the existence of God is one of the most important and central themes of the Qur'an. We will see in the fifth installment in this series of presentations that this Qur'anic argument is in fact simple and straightforward, and that it only seems obscure in the present age because of the irrational yet nevertheless powerful influence of materialism. For now, I will assume that the Qur'anic argument is not yet clear in your mind, and I will proceed to explain it until it does become clear. The question that you are probably asking as you read the statement on the screen, the universe is evidence for the existence of God, is why? Why is the universe evidence for the existence of God? There's more than one reason why. In this presentation, I will focus on one of these reasons, which is that the universe is evidence for God's existence because it is contingent. The word contingent is not an everyday word like apple or orange, and therefore needs a definition. Here's a definition of what it means for a fact to be contingent. A fact is contingent when it could have been otherwise. Let's clarify this definition by applying it to the verse that we just saw. That verse mentions several facts in the universe. The first fact that the verse mentions is the creation of the universe, the fact that it did not exist and then began to exist. This fact shows us that the universe's existence is a contingent fact. The existence of the universe, the fact that the universe exists, is a contingent fact. Why is it a contingent fact? Well, remember that a contingent fact is a fact that could have been otherwise. And the universe's existence is a contingent fact because even though it exists, it could have been otherwise. It could have not existed. The fact that it could have not existed makes it contingent. This fact that it could have not existed can be known through reason, and it can also be known through scientific inference, as we will explain in a future presentation on the creation of the universe. The second fact that the verse mentions is the fact of the night, and the third fact is the fact of the day. The verse talks about the succession of the night and day. Now, the night and the day that we experience in the world, both of these facts are contingent facts. The night is contingent because even though it might be night right now, it could have been day. And the day is contingent because even though it is day right now, it could have been night. So the day and night are contingent facts. The verse then mentions the fact that ships sail in the sea. The sailing of ships in the sea is also a contingent fact because ships sail, but they could have sank, as we see in many cases when ships do in fact sink. The verse then talks about the fact of rain, that God sends down water from the heavens. He sends down rain from the sky. Rain too is a contingent fact because it might be raining right now, but it could have been sunny. So rain is a contingent fact. The verse then goes on to mention many other facts. It mentions the facts of plant life, animal life, winds and clouds, and other verses in the Quran that expound this argument that we are explaining in this presentation. They mention many other phenomena, many other facts in the universe. What all of these verses point to is that everything in the universe is contingent because everything in the universe could have been otherwise. The question that this raises is, what made the things in the universe the way that they are? When something is contingent, when a fact is contingent, then it's true because it's a fact. But the fact that the fact is contingent leads us to ask the question, what made it the way that it is? The contingency of a fact reveals that there was something external to that fact that made it the way that it is. So the universe's existence is a contingent fact. So it exists, the universe exists, this is a fact, but since this is a contingent fact, it could have not existed. This leads us to ask the question, what made it exist? The night is a contingent fact because it could have been day. That leads us to ask the question, what made it night? The day is a contingent fact because it could have been night. That leads us to ask the question, what made it day? The ships that sail in the sea, their sailing is a contingent fact. That leads us to ask the question, what makes them sail? The rain that falls from the sky is a contingent fact. That leads us to ask the question, what made it rain? Except for the first fact that we just saw, namely the fact that the universe began to exist, which we'll put aside for now, all the other four facts, they are all recognized as contingent by scientists, even though they don't say so. The fact that a scientist asks the question, what made it night, day, what made ships sail, what made it rain, reveals that he or she sees that there was something outside of these facts that made them the way that they are. The entire project of modern science is based on the perception of contingency in all of the facts of the universe. Now, the way that a scientist will answer questions such as these is by pointing to some other contingent fact in the universe. So when a scientist poses the question, what made it night or what made it day, he'll point to nuclear fusion in the core of the sun, which releases light and heat energy, and the rotation of the earth around its own axis, which turns various parts of it towards the sun, making it day over there, and then turns those parts away from the sun, making it night over there. When he's asked about what makes ships sail, he'll point towards the density of the material with which they are made, which causes them to float, or the fact that the ship has been carefully designed so that the weight of the water that the ship displaces is greater than the weight of the ship itself, creating an upwards force up from the sea, making the ship float, as well as the winds that blow that actually make the ships sail, makes them move. When he's asked what makes it rain, he'll point to the fact that the sun causes the water in the seas and the rivers to evaporate. This evaporation, water vapor goes up into the sky, condenses high up in the sky where it's cooler in the form of clouds, and then depending on where these clouds are moved and the temperatures and the movement of the winds, it may rain in a particular place or it may not rain. Science studies contingent facts and explains them with reference to other contingent facts. Scientists study contingent causation. The contingent causation that they study is true, but when it's studied without reference to God, it is inadequate and misleading because it implicitly says that every contingent fact in the universe was a contingent fact, ad infinitum. Let me explain. Let's take a contingent fact. Let's take the last contingent fact that we saw, namely the falling of the rain from the sky. We saw that the thing that a scientist might say makes the falling of the rain true is the water cycle, the fact that the heat of the sun evaporates the water in the rivers and seas, which rises and then forms clouds and then condenses and and the drops of rain get heavier and heavier until eventually they come down as rain. Now this explanation, this cause, the thing that made the first contingent fact true, namely the rain, was another contingent fact. The evaporation, the rising of the water vapor and its condensing into clouds and falling down as rain is itself a contingent fact. All of these are contingent facts. And that leads us to ask the question, what made them true? Now, a scientist will quickly point to a third contingent fact. So he might say that the rising of the water vapor and the formation of clouds and the moving of clouds and the condensation ultimately into rain is caused by wind streams moving in different directions, which create different pressure areas. But this too is a contingent fact, because the movement of wind in a particular area is a contingent fact. This was another contingent fact that was, by the way, mentioned in the verse that we just saw. And so that leads us to ask the question, what made this third contingent fact true? The scientist will quickly point to another contingent fact. He might say that the wind streams are caused by the uneven heating of the sun. So because the sun heats the surface of the earth unevenly, it creates areas of high and low pressure that begins the process of the movement of the winds, and then the movement of the winds is furthered by other factors that leads to the wind streams and greater discrepancies in high and low pressure. But this too is a contingent fact, so we need to ask what made this fourth contingent fact true, and they might point to another contingent fact and say that the uneven heating of the earth is caused by the fact that it rotates on an axis, and the axis is tilted about 23.5 degrees, and because it spins on this tilted axis, the sun heats the various areas of the earth unevenly. But this too is a contingent fact. What is it that made the earth spin in the first place, let alone spin on an axis? And there might be another contingent fact and another contingent fact and another contingent fact. And when these contingent facts are studied without reference to God, as most science classes are, it gives the impression that a never-ending series of contingent facts makes the contingent facts that we see around us true, but that is not possible, because there's nothing in such a series that would make anything true. Let me explain why. Let's take the analogy of mathematical theorems. Let's say that I discover a new mathematical theorem that nobody has ever seen or heard of before. I present it to an audience of mathematicians, and they're going to ask me, what is it that makes your theorem true? Prove it. I quickly pull out another theorem, even more amazing than the first one, and I say that the proof of the first theorem is this second one. They, of course, ask me for proof for the second theorem, after which I proceed to pull out a third theorem. They ask me for proof. I pull out a fourth theorem. They ask me for proof. I pull out another one. And then I say, don't waste your time. I have an infinite series of theorems. Every time you ask me to prove one theorem, I'll pull out an even more amazing theorem than the one that you just saw. Nobody will accept this, because no theorem makes any other theorem true. In order for a theorem to be true, it needs to be proven true by resting on axioms. An axiom is a statement that does not need to be made true by anything else. From axioms, I infer theorems. From there, I can infer more theorems, and so on. Everything ultimately needs to return to axioms. In order for a proof to be adequate, it must rest on axioms. The same is the case with the example that we're considering in this presentation. If one contingent fact is made true by another one, then by another one, then by another one, then by another one, and so on ad infinitum, this is unacceptable, because just as no theorem is made true by another theorem, no contingent fact is made true by any other contingent fact. In order for any contingent fact to be made true, it needs to rest on some necessary fact. A necessary fact is like an axiom in the case of mathematical theorems. An axiom, we saw, was something that is true, that does not need to be proven true. A necessary fact is a fact that does not need to be made true by anything else. Just as a mathematical theorem is only true if it rests on axioms, the contingent facts of the universe, which are in fact true, can only be true if they rest on a necessary fact. So if we look at this chain of contingent causation from the first contingent fact to the second contingent fact to the third to the fourth and so on until it ends at a necessary fact which must be there, if someone asks the question, what made any one of these contingent facts true? The answer, in reality, is not any other contingent fact. The answer, in reality, is that every contingent fact was actually made true by the necessary fact. To say that one contingent fact was made true by another contingent fact does not answer the question, what made it true? It simply delays the answer by passing the buck, by giving another fact to which the same question can be asked. A contingent fact can only be made true by a necessary fact. This is the most important point in this lesson. A contingent fact can only be made true by a necessary fact. Now, since all of the phenomena that were mentioned in the verse that we saw were all contingent phenomena, since we saw that the verses of the Qur'an, they highlight the fact that the facts of the universe are all contingent, and since contingent facts can only be made true by a necessary fact, the facts of the universe, they're all contingent, therefore they were all made true by a necessary fact, and that necessary fact is God. So when the Qur'an talks about the creation of the heavens and the earth, the succession of night and day, the ships that sail in the sea, the rain that God sends down from the sky and gives life therewith to the earth after its death, the animals of all kinds that He scatters through the earth, the wind and the clouds, when He talks about all of these things and says that in them are signs for those who reflect, then one of the things, this is not the only thing as we'll see in future presentations, one of the things that these phenomena, they point us to is they point us to the existence of God by virtue of their contingency. Because they could have been otherwise, we know that they were made by someone who could not have been otherwise. The universe is evidence for the existence of God because it is contingent. And a contingent thing can only be the case if it was made true by a being that exists necessarily. A being that exists necessarily. This concept is not immediately obvious to someone who hears it for the first time. That's why we need to now ask the question, what is a being that exists necessarily? And we'll take up the answer to that question in the next installment in this series of presentations. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.